When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop last-minute deals now.
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
My heart sank as I stood there, speechless. I desperately hoped the darkness would hide the fact I was shaking.
The crew gave their best wishes and David shut the door. But they felt in their bones that something was wrong.
At that point, fear crept over me. I was too scared to move. All I wanted was for him to shut the window and drive away as fast as possible.
From Killer Podcasts, true tales of horror, bizarre happenings, unexplainable events. This is Disturbed. Hello, and welcome back to the show. This week, we're bringing you 5 stories that will make your blood run cold. So sit back, listen closely, and dive into the horror. First, a story narrated by Terra Ashe from Reddit user PowderFresh86. The Black Car.
My best friend Trevor and I used to go on weekly shopping trips to a major general merchandise store in my city. This particular store has multiple locations, but not all of the locations are always well stocked. One location is not in the best of areas, but usually has pretty good stock, so we shopped at that one the most. Trevor is the type that doesn't bother looking for a parking spot close to the door, which I hate. He'll literally park all the way in the back of the parking lot and make us walk, with my bad knees and all. One weekend, we pulled in next to a black car with tinted windows sitting at the back of the parking lot. We didn't think much of it, but it was still there when we left over an hour later. The next weekend, when we came back, the same car was there, parked in the exact same spot. Then 2 weekends later, the same car was there, in the same spot, parked in the same way. My friend and I thought it belonged to an employee, or maybe someone hid their car there to avoid repossession, which people have done before. Almost 2 months went by, and that black car remained in the same spot. For some reason, seeing it gave me the creeps. I noticed that the window started looking kind of strange from the inside. One night, I was watching the news with my family when a story about that particular general store popped up. Apparently, one of the employees had noticed the car for weeks as well, and upon gathering shopping carts, decided to inspect the vehicle. To his horror, what he found was a well-decomposed corpse of a murdered woman. Her boyfriend had murdered her, and she'd fallen over into the passenger seat of the car. Due to the tinted windows, unless one pressed their face to it and looked inside, you wouldn't be able to see in. Thankfully, they were able to convict the man. Trevor and I were horrified and disturbed. We were also very saddened that someone's child, sister, and friend had been murdered and disregarded in the parking lot. Later that year, another body was found in an out-of-order bathroom stall at that same store. Needless to say, Trevor and I refuse to ever go back to that location. We just can't.
Our next story is told by Adam C. Alderson. When someone desperately needs help, but you have no idea how to help them.
Last year, I was driving back to Toronto with my boss after filming a documentary for a week in various states. My boss was driving and I was in the passenger seat. It had already been a long trip and it was approaching 3 a.m. We were in Buffalo, New York when my boss decided to leave the highway to find somewhere to park and quickly do something on his laptop. We ended up in what looked like an abandoned town. No lights, old, deserted houses, and not a single soul in sight. His laptop was in the trunk, so he got out of the car to retrieve it. As he was about to get back into the car, a vehicle suddenly pulled up in front of us, and a young woman stepped out and started talking to my boss. She asked him what laptop he was using, they briefly chatted about it, and then my boss wished her a good night. This first interaction gave me chills, as it's beyond creepy to interact with people in a deserted town at 3 a.m. My boss got back in the car, shut the door, and opened his laptop, browsing for something. Barely a minute later, we heard a knock on the car window. It was the woman again. My boss, who's an incredibly kind person and does a lot of social justice work, opened the window with a big smile, likely out of a sense of not wanting to seem dismissive or condescending. The woman said, "I need help." My boss replied, "Oh, what's going on?" The woman suddenly started pouring her heart out. "I had a fight with my mom," she said. "She never really loved me. I think she hates me. She's hated me since the day I was born." My boss, clearly a bit anxious but still trying to help, asked her if she had any other support in her life. Friends, family, anyone she could turn to. "I had a boyfriend." She started, sounding extremely desperate. I don't know. We fought and I tried to kill him, and I don't know if he's the one who's dead or if I'm dead." At that point, fear crept over me. I was too scared to move. My boss, clearly growing more anxious, continued talking to her in his usual kind manner. All I wanted was for him to shut the window and drive away as fast as possible. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry you're going through this, but we've got to go. It's pretty late." Then the woman said, "Can I come with you?" The strange request was even stranger given that she had her own vehicle. My boss said, No, I don't think so. Our back seat is full." It actually was, thank God, filled with heavy film equipment. The woman paused for a moment, and then said something that sent chills down my spine. "All my life, I've suffered so much because of men. Men have destroyed me, and you are men. I just want you to sacrifice something for me." I was frozen with fear. I could tell my boss was also scared, but he was trying to stay calm. He replied politely, "I'm sorry. We're really tired. We just want to get home." The woman took a couple of steps toward her car, and without wasting another second, my boss started the engine and drove off. We didn't speak for the next 10 minutes. The tension in the car was palpable, and I could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Finally, I worked up the courage to ask him if everything I heard was the same as what he heard. He confirmed it was. We both learned a valuable lesson that night. Don't ever stop your car in the middle of the night unless the area is safe and well lit.
The next story comes from Reddit user Only1Moggin and is narrated by Kyra Cornett. Helen's Bridge.
About 3 years ago, I met my boyfriend Taylor, and after we'd been dating for a few weeks, we decided to go camping in the woods on Halloween weekend. The spot we chose was right next to the supposedly haunted Helen's Bridge near Tunnel Road in Asheville, North Carolina. It was a beautiful area, and with all the stories we'd heard about the bridge's haunting, it was just spooky enough for a little thrill. I wish I could say Helen's Bridge was the scariest part about the weekend, but it's not even close. Halloween night, Taylor and I were planning to go to a show. We decided that we would get ready at camp while he walked into town to buy drinks and some food to eat before we left. We knew he might not make it back before dark, but we figured at most it would be 30 minutes after dark when he'd arrive. I had no problem with this. I had lots of experience camping solo and was pretty woodsy. The only thing I could imagine spooking me was if a bear happened to wander into our campsite, and I was already prepared for that sort of scenario. We'd chosen an area that was super secluded, backcountry sort of camping, so it would be just the two of us the whole weekend. It was more romantic that way, and the solitude was so peaceful. It didn't take me long to get ready, and I knew it would still be another 45 minutes or so before Taylor returned. I decided to read a book in the tent with the door open for some air. 10 minutes into reading, I heard a fairly large branch break a couple of feet behind my tent. I had learned from my past camping experience how to gauge the size of an animal by the sound they make walking through the woods. This one seemed big. It had to be a bear. It wasn't quite pitch black out yet, so I got out of my tent and turned around to shout at the bear to scare it off. But there was no bear. It was a huge man, probably about 6'6". Completely taken off guard and pretty nervous about the situation, I instinctively said, "Hi." I wish I hadn't been so friendly, but of course my habit was to be polite. He said, "Hello," and stepped closer. I thought he had set up camp nearby and would just give a quick introduction and then leave, but I was horribly mistaken. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "What's a pretty thing like you doing alone in the woods all by yourself?" he asked. "Don't you know bad things can happen to pretty little girls like you?" I tried to stay calm and said my boyfriend was right down the hill and would be right back, hoping this would get him to leave. It didn't. He said, "What if I told you I've been watching y'all for a few days now, and I know you're lying? He'll be gone for a minute." My heart sank as I stood there, speechless. He continued on, "Why are you hiding out in the woods? I'm hiding because I raped my girlfriend's sister. I can tell that bothers you. It bothers you a lot, doesn't it?" I desperately hoped the darkness would hide the fact I was shaking. I wanted to appear unaffected by his words and just annoyed at his existence. I rolled my eyes and reached into my tent to grab my water bottle, just to give my brain a few seconds to figure out how to tell him to get the fuck away from me. When I looked back up at him, I found that he'd noiselessly gotten much closer to me. Before I could react, he punched me in the face, knocking me over. Thankfully, I was probably unconscious for only a second. When I opened the only eye I could, he punched me again and tried to get on top of me. Terrified, I rolled out of the way, then got up and started running. I had no idea where I was going. I had no light, no shoes, and no phone. I knew it was a good mile before I'd reach any neighborhood. I just kept running and running, screaming as I fled. I could hear him shouting as he chased me. "You're dead when I catch you. You're so fucked when I catch you." I finally saw the first sign of civilization, a parked car. I threw myself to the ground and hid under the car, my heart pounding uncontrollably. I lay there for some time, quietly catching my breath. I didn't hear his voice or his footsteps anymore. Eventually, I concluded that I'd lost him, but there was no way I was going back to my camp alone. I got out from under the car and made my way to the nearest house. I knocked on their door and asked to use their phone to call my boyfriend and the police. Thankfully, they let me inside and allowed me to use their phone. I don't know if the things that man said were true or if he made them up to scare me, but what I do know is that Halloween got entirely too real that year.
You're listening to Disturbed. We'll be right back.
All right, we're all set for the party. I've trimmed the tree, hung the mistletoe, and paired all those weird-shaped knives and forks with the appropriate cheeses. And I plugged in the Bartesian.
Bartesian?
It's a home cocktail maker that makes over 60 premium cocktails, plus a whole lot of seasonal favorites, too. I just got it for $50 off. So, how about a Cosmopolitan or a mistletoe margarita?
I'm thirsty.
Watch. I just pop in a capsule, choose my strength, and...
Wow, it's beginning to feel more seasonal in here already.
If your holiday party doesn't have a bartender, then you become the bartender. Unless you've got a Bartesian, because Bartesian crafts every cocktail perfectly in as little as 30 seconds. And I just got it for $50 off.
'Tis the season to be jollier.
Add some holiday flavor to every celebration with the sleek, sophisticated home cocktail maker, Bartesian. Get $50 off any cocktail maker at bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's getting cold out there. Nights are long, days are gray. It feels bleak, like I can hardly stand to get out of bed in the morning. Did hell really freeze over? Or do I just have seasonal depression? It's impossible to figure out on your own. Well, you don't have to. If you're struggling with the winter blues, therapy can give you positive coping skills and a way to move forward. If you're considering therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's convenient, entirely online, and they match you with a licensed therapist quickly and easily. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/DTHS to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/DTHS. Welcome back to the podcast. Our next story is I was once dragged into a violent, bloody robbery. Narrated by Hannah Robertson.
I wasn't exactly the most popular kid in high school. I was just an average girl, not cool enough to hang about with the popular crowd, but not quirky enough to get bullied either. Honestly, if you asked most of my classmates today, they probably wouldn't even remember me. I grew up in a big city. I won't say where, but think of places like Detroit, Chicago, or Philadelphia. My neighborhood was this mix of faded brick buildings and concrete jungles. There was always noise, honking horns, sirens, and stuff like that. It had its own kind of charm, but sometimes it felt a little heavy. And yeah, there was definitely a fair amount of crime. Like I said, I wasn't super popular. My only claim to fame was that my dad owned a junkyard with an iron shredder. It might sound a bit odd, but honestly, it was kind of fascinating. Occasionally, people wanted to come by just to watch that machine shred old washing machines and rusty bikes into tiny bits. The first time I saw it in action, I was about 10, and the noise was like thunder. I remember feeling scared watching how the metal twisted and crumpled. It was oddly beautiful in a destructive way. When I was in high school, all the girls were crushing on this guy named Marco, and of course, I was too. He was a basketball star who worked out all the time, and he seemed super smart too. Everyone knew he had some family problems, but he still radiated confidence. One night, during a football game, he came over to talk to me. My heart literally raced. I half expected someone to pinch me to wake me up from this dream. He didn't say much, just that he wanted to talk to me and asked me where he could find me at halftime. I said we could meet at the front entrance. At halftime, we slipped away to his car. He said he wanted to go to McDonald's. That felt so random, but I wasn't about to complain. This was my first chance to hang out with Marco, and it was starting to feel like a date. While we were driving, he suddenly pulled over and asked if he could show me something. Then, he took out a gun. My heart dropped into my stomach. Nothing could have prepared me for that, and what he said next shocked me even more. "I need you to get rid of this." Everything around me went blurry. When someone holds a gun in front of you, all rational thought vanishes. I was terrified. I didn't want to be in that situation. I couldn't really say no, because he was literally holding a gun. My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. I felt like the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. I didn't ask questions, just nodded yes. He told me to text him, "It was nice seeing you at the game today," once I got rid of it. We went through the McDonald's drive-thru, and I didn't have an appetite. I almost felt like I was being kidnapped, and in a way, I kind of was. He didn't force me to get in the car with him, but I couldn't really tell him to let me go either. I felt like I was intimidated into staying in his car. Once we got back to the school, he handed me the gun and dropped me off in the parking lot. We said goodbye from there. I went home and grabbed the keys to the junkyard, praying my parents wouldn't catch me. Thankfully, they were upstairs. The keys were on the fridge. I felt like I was living in a bad movie. How could this be real life? As I drove to the junkyard, panic set in hard. What if opening the gate was too loud and someone heard me? What if an alarm went off? What if someone showed up while I was there? What if the gun got stuck in the shredder? I'd never operated that thing alone. What if I accidentally hurt myself? What if I couldn't figure out how to operate the shredder in time? What if this whole plan backfired and made everything worse? I knew this wasn't going to work out. So instead, I went back to McDonald's, ordered a large meal, because fries make everything better, and carefully slipped the gun into the paper bag. I looked on Google Maps, found a park about 30 minutes away, and drove there trying to stay calm. When I got to the park, I felt strangely detached from everything around me. I tossed the McDonald's bag into a trash can. Then I sat on a bench with my heart racing while trying to think of what to say if someone asked what I was doing. If anyone had approached me that night and asked if I was okay, I would have just asked them to call an ambulance for me. I felt so guilty that I literally felt sick. I have no idea how long I spent trying to calm down, but eventually, I was ready to go home. Later on, I found out Marco's sister had gotten mixed up in something truly horrific that night. She was involved in a violent robbery where she'd used the gun to threaten a store owner. The store owner had not cooperated with her, and she'd pistol whipped him, leaving him bloodied and dazed on the floor. Thankfully, no one was killed, but the brutality of it all felt terrifying and sad. The victim was an old man. I was caught up in something way darker than I'd ever imagined. When Marco's sister was arrested and charged, I was terrified someone would find out what I'd done and link it back to me. I was carrying around a heavy secret, and I felt like I was suffocating. The thought of being questioned by the police, or worse, becoming a suspect, haunted me. I never brought up the incident to anyone. When I saw Marco around school, I made sure not to even make eye contact. Thankfully, I never heard anything more about it. The rumors faded, and life went on. When girls talked about Marco, I said just enough to pretend like everything was normal. I still visit home occasionally and have seen Marco around. He's always surrounded by friends, laughing and carefree, but we never talk. Just seeing him from afar leaves me with a chill. It's terrifying how easily I was intimidated into participating in something so horrific.
Our final story is narrated by Brian Jeffords from r/True Scary Stories, a true EMS horror story.
I worked as a dispatcher for a small ambulance station near a fairly large city in the middle of the U.S. And this is one of the craziest stories I have from this job. One of the services we offered was transporting disabled dialysis patients to and from their appointments. One of our dialysis patients was a woman named Susan, who lived with her son Ryan. Susan was probably in her late 70s and Ryan in his late 40s. 3 times a week, like clockwork, we sent a unit to bring Susan to and from her dialysis treatments. Everyone at the station knew her because, we'd been doing this for quite some time. We were all familiar with her and her son, whether it was the crew seeing her in person and taking care of her, or us dispatchers speaking to her or her son on the phone about her appointments. Naturally, when crews had news about her health, they would report back to keep everyone in the loop with how she was doing. At one point, she was not feeling well at all, but she still wanted to go to her dialysis appointment. So naturally, we obliged and took her in. At this appointment, she lost consciousness and was promptly taken by our crew to the hospital. When it was time again for her dialysis appointment, we gave the hospital a call to see if she'd been released and if she was, able to go to her appointment. The hospital staff informed us that she would likely be released the following day and would be receiving that day's dialysis treatment in the hospital. When the next treatment time rolled around, we called the hospital and were told she'd been released from their care the other day. Well, that was great news, but a little strange since we were always her first call for transportation, and we hadn't heard anything from her or David. We called David to see if she requested transportation for her treatment that day. He informed us that she wasn't feeling well and wasn't up to it, and that he was considering taking her back to the hospital. Now, we told him if he needed us, just give us a call. We never got a call. The next appointment rolled around and we called David again to ask if she'd be going, but he said she was sick and back in the hospital. Weird again, since we hadn't been the ones to take her to the hospital, but it didn't seem that far off considering her health had been deteriorating. Next appointment, the same thing happened. We called David, his mom was in the hospital, we moved on. Now, this is where things took a bit of a turn. When the next appointment came up, we tried calling David to ask about his mother's status, but he never answered or returned our calls. So, since we had a contract with Susan to take her to these appointments unless told otherwise, we sent a crew to collect her for treatment. When the crew arrived at her house, they knocked on the door with no response. They knocked again and were eventually greeted by David, just smoking a cigarette. David seemed surprised to see them. The crew said they were there to pick up Susan for her appointment. David responded that he'd forgotten to call and Susan was still in the hospital, not doing well. The crew gave their best wishes and David shut the door. But they felt in their bones that something was wrong. The crew immediately radioed dispatch that something wasn't right and requested that we call the hospital to see if she was still there. The hospital had no record of her being there since the time our crew had taken her. We told the crew to leave the house, and we called the police to request a welfare check for Susan. We heard nothing the rest of the day. The next morning, I came into work, and the first call I took began with, "This is Sheriff Turner. I'm calling to report back on the welfare check you asked us to perform yesterday." I was nervous, as he sounded concerned, and I hadn't really expected them to call us back with any news. He then let me know that upon arrival at the home, the officers spoke with David, who was adamant that his mother didn't feel well, but that she was back home from the hospital. The police asked to just check on Susan to make sure she was all right, and eventually David obliged and let the police in. Upon entering the home, they were met with a grim scene. The dead body of Susan propped up on the couch, wrapped in blankets as if watching television. She'd been dead for a while, approximately 2 weeks. When speaking to David, they found out that he'd been changing her clothes regularly and watching TV with her. Obviously, he was suffering from some sort of mental issue and grief, but, the thing was, he'd never taken good care of her until after she was dead. There was no news coverage or further updates from the police. Stuff like this happens right in your hometown, and most people will never know about it. Crazy, right?
Want more Disturbed? Check out our Patreon for member-exclusive content, early merch access, and other cool perks. I'm your host, Doug Bailey, and this has been Disturbed, a production of Killer Podcasts and part of the Evergreen Network. For more paranormal and true crime shows, visit killerpodcasts.com. Follow our social channels at Disturbed Podcast on Instagram or Disturbed_pod on Twitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and reviewing on your favorite listening platform. Share your own true horror story at disturbedpodcast.com. Music by Epidemic Sound and by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Our producer is Elizabeth Flood. Our sound designer and audio engineer is Nathan Corson. Executive producers Bridget Coyne and Noah Fouts. Until next time, stay safe out there.